Hey there, folks. This is Screen Watching. My name is Dan Barrett. On the podcast this week, it's just me. There's reasons for this. There's numerous reasons for it. Basically, it comes down to this. My co-host Simon Foster, he said to me about a month and a half ago, Dan, I'm going away in about a month's time. Can you organize some guest hosts or just let me know what you're planning on doing while I'm away? And I said, yes, sure, we'll get to that, Simon. It's fine. I've got a plan. It'll be all right. And so he told me about 2 weeks after that. It's like, just reminding you I'm heading out of the country for a couple of weeks. You've got this. And I'm like, it's fine. You do you. I've got it. Don't worry at all about it. And then he told me the other week, and it's like, this is the last one we're recording. I'm gone for the next 3 weeks. Have you got this? Is there anything you need from me? Can I do anything? I'm like, yeah, you just go and enjoy yourself. It's fine. Of course I've got this. And look, frankly, the week after we had an episode, there was a guest host that went swimmingly well. Big shout out to Mel Campbell who filled in. And now here we are the week afterwards, and you're finding little old me by myself without a co-host. Now, look, I know what you're immediately thinking. It's like, well, Dan just slacked off, didn't really organize it. And obviously that's true, but the more important thing to realize is that I've been horrendously unwell for the last week. Like 4 or 5 days. Basically, I've been just couch bound and just feeling just wretched. So as a result, I actually don't have a co-host this week, and I am flying solo. So, it happened, but it was going to happen regardless of whatever was happening. I've got people scheduled for next week. It's all fine. Don't think about what you're thinking about. But on this week's show, I've got a show for you. I'm going to talk about what I've been watching, and I'm going to talk to you about why there's a massive gap in a whole bunch of things to talk about. But anyway, stick around. It's going to be a fun screen watching, but a very short one. Let's play the theme.
This is not like TV, only better.
Television! Teacher, mother!
Secret lover.
What, that's it? That's your movie?
Well, I said that I had an idea for a movie.
So look, this is Screen Watching. My name's Dan Barrett. On the podcast, we are going to be doing no new reviews, really, because look, here's the current situation. It is as I record this, the 6th of October, 2023. The writers spent, 5 and a bit months on strike. The Screen Actors Guild have been on strike for 2 and a bit months, and that strike's still going. The writers are back. So, the late night show started up again during the week. We're going to talk about that in a little while. But yeah, they're back, but you can't really get any scripted dramas on the air for a few months because they take time to make. There's a couple of things that are kind of in the can. So there's a couple of shows sort of trickling out. There's a new NBC show called The Irrational, which I've seen a few episodes of now, and it's not too bad. That's okay, but that is one of the few. What we've actually got this week is a situation where roughly over, we'll say the last 3 weeks, if it was an ordinary year, we would have seen all the new network shows with their new and returning shows. That usually also means that a lot of the streaming services usually go a little bit lighter in terms of some of the big releases because it's just a bit harder to get traction in a market where the networks are spending a lot of money on their brand new programs, and often a lot of those shows disappear after a couple of weeks. But why waste your big guys when, it's just going to be a busy, crowded marketplace for a few weeks? So usually you find a bit of quietness around the streaming. But also the streamers have to delay some of their content as well because they don't quite have enough to really justify just releasing everything just as they usually do. They didn't know how long the strikes would be lasting for, so they've certainly stretched out what they're releasing and trickling things a little just to, eke their way out through the strike period. So what we've got is instead of a whole bunch of shows returning over the course of about a month and a half, they've all kind of more or less returned last week and this week. So there's a whole bunch of returning shows. You've got the Letterkenny spin-off series, Shoresy. That came back for its second season. The horsey family drama, Heartland, that's back for season 17. You've got a bunch of animated shows, The Simpsons and Bob's Burgers and Family Guy. Can you believe Bob's Burgers has been around for 14 seasons? I've never felt older than when I realised that. You've got a bunch of Canadian things. So Heartland, I'm pretty sure it's a Canadian deal. Murdoch Mysteries, Hudson and Rex. There's a show called Surreal Estates, which I feel might be a Canadian show. I'm not quite sure exactly what that is. So what else have we got? We've got Chucky, we've got Quantum Leap coming back for its second season. Finally, a streaming title, Lupin, is back for what I think is part 2 of season 2. That's the Gentleman French heist series, quite popular. Chances are you've probably already watched it. So that's back. Our Flag Means Death is back for season 2. So, that's a notable-ish sort of a title, I guess. The UK series Ghosts is back for its 5th and final season. And then I think there's also the return of Loki on Disney+. That's one of the Marvel shows. So there's certainly titles around, but there's nothing really sort of new. And I don't tend to do returning shows on this because unless it's a returning show where I've got something really specific I want to talk about, you already know what the program is. I see a big part of what we do in this podcast, really letting people know that shows exist and just give them some sort of indication as to whether they might be into it or not. So as a result, I don't do returning shows all that frequently because what's the point? And then when it comes to actually new things this week, it's really light on. There's a financial thriller which kind of looks half interesting on Netflix called Fair Play, but I don't really know much about it. So I'm going to give that one a look and we might discuss that on the podcast next week, maybe. There's a couple of foreign language dramas, nothing really jumping out that caught my attention. There's a new NBC series called Found, but we don't really do foreign American shows unless you can watch it in Australia. Netflix has a show called Everything Now, which is about a teenage girl who's returned from hospital after a battle with anorexia, and it's about her returning back to school. Look, I mean, it's not really a show that's sort of aimed at me, and I would imagine that much of the audience for the Screen Watching podcast probably not really aimed at them, so that kind of feels like reviewing for reviewing's sake rather than actually having any sort of value there. But maybe the one title that is something which probably really deserves our attention is this thing called Bargain.
안녕하세요.
안녕하세요. 고등학생.
네, 고등학교 2학년 18살.
고등학교 2학년.
병신 같은 새끼. 바로 경매 시작할게요. 신장부터 시작할게요.
This is a Korean drama that's cropped up on Paramount Plus, and a lot of the reviews are really saying that this is something which is just desperate to try to get the Squid Game sheen of interest off from it. Lucy Mangan from The Guardian gave it a really big thumbs up. I think it was 4 stars out of 5 from her. I tend to really appreciate and value what she has to say, so it's kind of caught my attention. Unfortunately, I only literally found out the show existed about 15 minutes ago, and I've got a pretty short time period where I can actually record this podcast, so I haven't had a chance to give it a proper look. But there's, I think, 6 episodes. Each episode is about 35 minutes long, so not a huge investment of time. It's probably worth a look. Lucy Mangan says that if you watch a minute of it, you're in for the whole season. So, give it a look. I think it might be worth our time. This is a show that's about a man who goes to a motel room to see a young woman that he is going to pay to have sex with. Some negotiations take place. He gets the rate down quite a bit, but begins to realize, wait, she's not actually a prostitute. She is instead someone who's trying to sell organs, and he is there to have his organs removed and sold. Oh, yeah, so I guess there's an organ trade happening.
Would you like to buy a monkey?
So look, as I said, I have been feeling horrendously unwell. And what you do when you're unwell is you sit down on a couch, you watch a whole bunch of stuff. I opted against watching TV. When I've got time down like that, I just watch a whole bunch of movies back to back. So usually I try to aim not for things that I've seen before, but for new things and things that, just kind of I wouldn't otherwise give my full focus to because I'm at home and there's phones that could be in my hand and whatnot. But if you're unwell, you just want to sit there and watch some movies. So this is what I did. So look, I'm going to run through a couple of the films I've been watching lately. I've pulled them up on the letterboxd.com/the Dan Barrett. Look, here's what I've been watching. So right before I fell sick, I did go to the cinema and I saw The Creator. We reviewed that on the program last week. Special guest reviewer Mel Campbell gave it an enthusiastic thumbs up. She did suggest that it was very earnest, and she wasn't wrong. It is very earnest. I wanted to like this more than I did. It's a film which has a original sci-fi premise at its core. It's not based on a comic book. It's not based off sci-fi literature at all. I want to be able to support something that is like an original creation like this. Unfortunately, look, I'm even okay with just like extreme earnestness. I just found that this was a case of a film where the director / writer, which is one and the same in this case, basically just kind of felt like they were doing a lot of saying and not showing. And yeah, like after having every small little bit explained to me for about 2 and a bit hours, I was more than happy to say goodbye to it. And I think I lasted about like 2/3 of the way through the film before I was just like, nah, this is the line. I've crossed it now. I just can't give this a thumbs up. So look, it's really nicely shot. I think there's some great effects and there's some really interesting ideas in it. But yeah, ultimately, I just don't think the film really necessarily worked, which is a shame. Theatre camp I saw after reading reviews for the last 2 months about this thing. People loved it. It's a mockumentary set in a theatre camp. Basically, I'd been sort of told that this was definitely sort of in the upper echelon of mockumentaries, and I just kind of found myself not really necessarily jiving with it. So part of the issue is really it's a Dan Barrett thing. It's not even really necessarily an issue with the movie. I tend to have a pretty low tolerance for overly theatrical people, phrasing it that way. There's a euphemism there, and I don't want to say that because that's not what I mean. I would just mean that I don't have a lot of tolerance for people that have their heads in the cloud with no real grounding, is really what I mean to say there. Theatre camp, it's just basically a whole bunch of theatre kids being theatre kids. And like, if you're into that, like, totally go for it. I get what the joke of the mockumentary is. Like, I think the performances were all pretty strong. I just, it's just not really necessarily a scene I want to spend a lot of time in, and I just bristled a bit too much with it. As I said, I think I said it. I totally get why people dig this film. It just wasn't really quite for me. Something I really did enjoy, though, was Flora and Son. This is an Apple TV Plus original film, which is from John Carney. He's the guy that made Once a bunch of years ago now, and also Sing Street, I'm pretty sure was his as well. I haven't seen Sing Street. I did see Once and really, really liked that. That's definitely sort of stuck with me. Flora and Son, the premise of this one is it's Eve Hewson. She is playing a woman who's in her late 20s. She'd had a kid when I think she's early 30s. Sorry, I got to do some math there, and I don't care to do that. Anyway, youngish woman. She had a kid when she was 17. That kid's now about 14, 15 years old. Do the maths there. I think it works out to her being 32. Basically, she hasn't been a particularly great mother. Not necessarily like a bad abusive mother, but certainly not a mother that's really been there to offer the care and support to a child that she probably should have. He has a biological father who's a musician. So when she ends up finding a guitar that's been thrown away, she thinks that maybe this is a good opportunity for him to invest in music and do something instead of just causing trouble on the streets and being a juvenile delinquent, which he is. So anyway, she gives him this guitar. He's not interested, but she decides to start playing around with it. She does a few YouTube tutorials with this guy based in LA. She likes his general vibe, so she gets in contact with him. Dude's played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And so the two of them end up sort of creating this sort of romance of sorts through Zoom chats as, they, bond over their music. But at the same time, she's also starting to bond with her son over music. So while he wasn't interested in her acoustic guitar, he has been sort of playing around with loops and just sort of mess around in the electronic music space. She discovers that and finds a way for them to form a bond together over a shared love of music creation. And it's about building stuff together, and it's about forming a bond and a connection where you struggle to do it in any other way other than through just a direct connection of soul. It's really charming and nice and goes exactly where you expect it to. There's no real surprises in this by any means, but it's just really pleasant and lovely. I had a really good time with that one.
Young Max, one more offence and you'll be behind bars. Flora, you're his mother. Find him something to do.
What are you doing right now?
You don't want to know.
You are a great mother. Am I? Happy birthday.
What's that?
It's yours.
Don't want to play. Since when am I a guitarist?
I can't go on like this, living in a shoebox with a kid who hates me.
Can't wait for the day I don't have to be here.
Go on! Go to your dad!
Look, as I said, I was sick on the couch, and when you're sick on the couch, you watch Pump Up the Volume. Look, let's just play a clip.
He's got a pirate radio station. Nobody knows who he is.
I could be that anonymous nerd sitting across from you, and when you turn around, and he just looks away. He never looks back at you again.
This is a song for the 90s. Welcome to Dorina Central. May I take your order, please?
Yeah, I want...
That was deep.
I like the idea that a voice can just go somewhere uninvited, like a dirty thought in a nice, clean mind.
Pump Up the Volume. Look, I've seen this so many times throughout my life, and I have to say, like, there was probably a gap of like 7 or 8 years where I just hadn't really watched it before watching it the most recent time, and boy, that film, I think, probably just gets a little bit better as time goes on. What's really interesting about it is thinking about it in a world where it's very much about kids being provided the ability to have a voice, and they get that voice through a guy that's doing pirate radio. And look, this is a film from 1990. It's been, 33 years since Pump Up the Volume came out. And since then, I mean, look at the change in media climate. Any kid can now have a voice and be out there and just generally be heard. Pirate radio just seems like such an antiquated, just odd idea at the best of times. These days, you know, he'd be hosting a podcast, but also, let's be real, teenagers aren't listening to podcasts, so he's probably not even doing that. I guess he's uploading his videos to TikTok or to, you know, wherever. Yeah, like, this film doesn't really exist in the modern era in the way that it does here, but it's kind of interesting. If I was to do Pump Up the Volume again today, I'd do it as like underground tape trading or something and really give it like a tangible media sort of a quality to it and take it really underground where people really can't find it. But I don't know, I'm not even sure this film needs to exist anymore, but I guess the big takeaway is how lovely Samantha Mathis. Another film that I watched, because I really, really like the Irma Vep remake TV series that aired on HBO early this year, late last year. It must have been last year. I'm sure I made my top 10 list of last year. I really like that, but I haven't really seen a lot of other Olivier Assayas films, so I wanted to watch one. So I watched a film which is considered one of his lesser works, but I really quite liked it. It's a relationship drama called Late August, Early September. It's about these two guys, both published writers, but neither of them necessarily hugely successful. One of them, they both got relationship issues of sorts. They're in their late 30s, early 40s, and one of them ends up coming... he's sick with like an undisclosed medical issue. But anyway, it's kind of just what happens to this group of people. The entire film, it's just random conversations. It's little snippets and slices of life. If you're into that kind of thing, like, give it a look. I probably understand why they say it's a lesser work, but I connected with it. I thought it was really quite good. Something which is, what is a polite way to phrase this? Effing terrible. There was this time in the early to mid 2000s where they made a whole bunch of TV movies that were based off telling the unauthorized story of what happened behind insert name of classic TV program. So you may have seen them where there was behind the scenes of, I'm sure there was a Brady Bunch one, there was a Different Strokes one for sure. There was a Full House behind the scenes. What else? Oh gosh. There was just a whole bunch of them. There was a 90210 one. There was a Melrose Place one. Both of those two were streaming on Binge here in Australia. You might still be able to find them. But I watched, behind the camera, the unauthorized story of Mork and Mindy. Yeah, that's right. That's how I spent my time. Look, this one really, I mean, it was terrible, but bizarrely captivating. So part of the problem is that you got Chris Diamantopoulos, who's definitely a dude you've seen in things, probably best remembered for Silicon Valley, but you've seen him in a whole bunch of comedies and things over the last couple of years. Also, weirdly, Erin Hayes, who played Second Banana to Kevin James in the Kevin Can Wait TV show. She plays Pam Dorber in this one, who's obviously very much a second banana to Robin Williams. So that was interesting. But watching Diamantopoulos trying to play Robin Williams. Like, it was impossible. Like, there's nobody that can really command that. And, like, he does the best possible version that could possibly be done, but it's still just kind of awful to watch. Yeah, look, it's not a good program at all, but weirdly captivating, and for, like, a couple of reasons. The one that really caught me was that Daniel Roebuck is in this one. Daniel Roebuck, gosh. Okay, so he's in this. He's playing Gary Marshall, who's the executive producer of Mork Mindy, but also of Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley. And you've seen, I'm sure, Gary Marshall movies that he made after he left television, and he acted in a few as well. Like, Gary Marshall's a known presence. It seems weird that I even explained who he is. But Daniel Roebuck plays him in this, and, like, the performance is fine. Like, it's as good a Gary Marshall as anyone's really going to do. And, like, again, the writing's terrible. But Daniel Roebuck is best known for playing Jay Leno in a TV movie, The Late Shift, which is really actually quite good. But that's very much about the late night wars where Jay Leno got the Tonight Show over David Letterman. Really watchable film. Like, that's actually the best of any of these kind of behind the scenes biopics of a TV show, behind the scenes thing. But there is a funny scene where the guy that, I can't think of the name of the head writer of the guy that became the head writer for Mork Mindy, but the guy that wrote the episode of Happy Days where Mork guest starred on it and so got to do his TV show, that guy's tasked with trying to find an actor to play Mork. There's a scene where he's about to go to the Comedy Store to go and find Jay Leno, who's been suggested as a good voice for it. And so Daniel Roebuck's walking past the room and he hears, Jay Leno. And so, wink to the camera. Fun moment, terrible film, terrible movie. I regret none of it. And finally, the last thing that I watched while on my deathbed was this film called Maggie's Plan. I don't know if people broadly know Maggie's Plan. It was on a watch list of mine. And clearly I'd come across it somewhere telling me to watch it. And I really had no connection at all to this film. But I was sitting there and I looked at it on my watch list and I'm like, well, I totally know why I added this. It was one of those sort of mid-2000s, Greta Gerwig's on the way up, so she hadn't directed anything yet, certainly no billion-dollar Barbie movies for Warner Brothers, but she was appearing in a whole bunch of indie films in, like, that mid-2000s period, as she really broke out. More late 2000s, so, like, what even is, like, her trajectory? Like, I'm going to say, like, maybe sort of 2007 through to 2020, she was just appearing in stuff, but this is a 2015 film she was in. Directed by Rebecca Miller, who I think may have written it as well. I'm not too sure. She's the wife of Daniel Day-Lewis, just as a, doesn't really mean anything, doesn't give her any credibility, but, it's a real-world connection. I don't know anything about Rebecca Miller other than that. Anyway, she knows how to make a good movie here. It's Greta Gerwig starring in it. She's a woman, the titular Maggie. She is someone who doesn't really believe in destiny so much. She's trying to sort of create her own destiny. She's, in her late 20s. She wants to have a kid, so she's trying to find a way to have a kid by herself. So she's trying to find, like, a donor and all that sort of stuff. While she's going through that process, she ends up falling in love with this guy that's a author who's working at the university, well, the college. It's American. The college that she works at, which is the New School in New York City. So anyway, it's New York based, so obviously you got, like, all those great scenes where people are walking around, like, Greenwich Village and whatnot. But she's a typical Greta Gerwig of the era type character. So, incredibly charming, but, slightly sort of a bit off center and whatnot. Ethan Hawke is playing a very Ethan Hawke type character. If he's playing what's his name from the Before series, like, as an author later in life, like, you'd buy that. Julianne Moore plays his wife of, I don't know if to actually say, like, where she's from. She's definitely doing some accent work, which is a bit frustrating, but, give it a pass. Greta Gerwig's character, the titular Maggie, she's got some good friends played by Bill Hader and Maya Rudolph, who are her husband and wife in it. Travis Fimmel's in it. Wallace Shawn appears in it for a couple of scenes. Look, it's a New York-based sort of talky comedy. If that kind of thing's your bag, like, definitely give this one a look. I found it incredibly charming. Look, I'm looking at my Letterboxd right now, and I was certainly under, definitely flued up. But, like, looking around, like, it seems like most other people are giving it a range of anywhere between, like, 4 stars, like myself, to like some less favorable 2 to 2.5 stars. Like, honestly, I get why people may not have connected with it. It worked for me. It's kind of like my bag, but, you know, maybe not for everyone, in the same way that I'm looking at some of the people that gave it 2 stars, and I'm pretty sure all these people loved theatre school. So, you know, yuck you yums. I think that's the phrase. Let's move on. So anyway, Maggie's Plan, I quite like that one. Talking New York comedies, if you dig it, give it a look. What else have I been thinking about? I've been thinking about US late night shows. So as I said at the beginning of the podcast, US late night shows are back. General sort of enthusiasm about the fact they have been on for about 5 months now. I was keen to watch them again, and I have to say, without those shows around for about 5 months, and it's not like I didn't watch any of these types of shows in that absence. I watched some old Craig Ferguson's. I watched a whole bunch of old David Letterman episodes. I was listening to the Strike Force 5 podcast. So it's not like I was disconnected at all from the idea of US late night. But there was definitely a strong feeling I had when the shows came back all on Monday, and all of them pretty much came back with the exact same format, which you'd expect, the same, you know, vibe, but all of them came back and did the exact same thing, which was, for the last 5 months we were away, and these are the jokes we couldn't tell during that time because we were away. And it was all just like the same sort of retreads like each other were telling. But the problem is, and this is the problem that faces US late night shows these days, which is that we live in a connected medium where everybody's a bit of a wise ass because, you know, we've all grown up with David Letterman in the 80s. As a result, people are always telling jokes on social media, whether you're, you know, Poison is Twitter or if it's, you know, whatever other platforms. The jokes are all out there, and so they were just telling the same jokes that we've already heard for the last 5 months. Like, there was nothing new really being told. And it really just seemed like this real moment where we watched these 5 people all coming back to TV within a space of 24 to 48 hours of each other, all telling tired jokes, all in the same format, and it just became really just apparent that something needs to change here. There's too many of them. They've all got the same presentational style. Like, they need to start shaking this up. Like, Jimmy Kimmel's talking about retiring sometime soon. Just retire, Jimmy Kimmel. I really like you, but, you know, we don't need you doing the same jokes that Colbert's doing or that Seth Meyers is doing. And Seth Meyers, I was listening to his podcast. He's talking about going on family trips with his brother in this podcast. It's a really fun, charming podcast. And look, Seth Meyers is hilarious in it. Really love that. But, and also backed up with the Strike Force 5 podcast, really funny guy. Watching him doing like his writer's jokes where he's not off the cuff and he's just doing pre-prepared material, none of the jokes were any good. And I really struggled with that show back. It could have caught me as a viewer if they started doing something a bit different and saw this as an opportunity to shake up the format. And I appreciate it's hard to shake up a format when your writers are off. But you know what? Your executive producers aren't off. You're still there as an executive producer. You can work in a non-writer's capacity. Think about what is it that makes your show work? What could make your show work for 2023 and beyond? And it doesn't feel like any of those conversations have really happened. And I know that there's sensitivities around that, but at the same time, like, that's not writing work, that's producing work. And it seems like no producing work's being done, and boy, is it being felt right now. Couple this with, during the last 5 months, in fact, it was just 3 weeks ago, Paul Provenza. Paul Provenza is a stand-up comic from the 1980s going into the early 90s. He's best known to Australian audiences as, do you remember in Northern Exposure when Joel ended up, actor's name who's just dropped out of my head entirely, Rob Morrow ends up deciding he wanted to leave Northern Exposure, but it wasn't like cold turkey. He was kind of appearing in half the episodes for the season. So he's that living in the woods, but they brought a new doctor into town. And there was like a young new doctor, and it was him and his wife, played by that lady that I really like, and I can't think of her name, but Paul Provenza was the guy. Fairly unoffensive, and the show got cancelled within that season. And it was a shame because I think Paul Provenza probably deserved a little bit better than that. And like, he never really sort of went on so much beyond that. He sort of went back to stand up, and he's done like a bunch of other things in the peripheral, but like, he's got an obsession with stand up. So in the early 90s, he did a show for, I'm going to say, Comedy Central, but it could have been the US Comedy Channel. I'm not sure. That was a late 80s, early 90s thing. But it was this thing called Comics Only, where he interviewed like a who's who of the alt comic scene of that time. So like your Janine Garafolos and your Ben Stillers and all that crew. I remember watching a lot of that through the 90s. It played here on the Comedy Channel in Australia. But also he was one of the co-directors of The Aristocrats. So doing that, obviously traded off that for a little while. He's written a couple of books. I think there's one called Satiristas. I remember interviewing him years ago for one of my former podcasts. Really lovely guy. It was late at night for him. He was stoned and I had a great chat. That was good. He started doing the show for Showtime called The Green Room. And what was fun about this program was that it was a talk show, but it was basically a talk show more or less in the round, where he'd bring on panelists. There'd be about 4 or 5 comedians, and they'd all be sitting there talking about, thematic ideas around comedy. And it was all people just telling personal anecdotes, and it was a live, raucous scenario where you had like the audience who were like literally just like on top of everyone. Like it was a hot, sweaty room. There was a lot of drinking taking place, probably a few other substances sort of, off camera as well. It just kind of felt like it was comedy really sort of being alive in a room. And there's very few shows I've seen that have really captured that. So like the fact the show never really quite took off, and it's just kind of a thing that like TV enthusiasts sort of talk about fondly because it was just this great format. Okay, but like it's never really replicated that much. And I always thought it was a shame that more shows don't take bold risks like that in sort of creating sort of unique formats and ways to have a relationship with the audience as part of an actual program. And I appreciate that we had this big thing called COVID, and the idea of a whole bunch of sweaty strangers around a bunch of sweaty comedians isn't really quite the sort of done thing. But in the 5 months that these US late night shows were away, and then they all came back and had that same distance away from the audience, the same sort of camera setups and same generic sets and telling the same jokes, whatever, the Green Room with Paul Provenza came back. And the Green Room with Paul Provenza didn't come back in a studio because Paul Provenza doesn't have a network backing him, but he came back and filmed a program in presumably his backyard where there's just a whole bunch of audience members standing around, a bunch of comedians who are just sitting there in the round. So these are comedians that include Doug Stanhope, and then comedians that I don't actually know, which is Andy Andrist, Henry Phillips, Christine Levine, and Annie Lederman. Maybe they mean something to you. I didn't really know them. But they had a very raw, very honest conversation where they went into some very dark areas and were telling jokes about it. And it's unlike anything you're seeing on these late night shows. It is vibrant, it's honest and real, okay? And then you watch these tired late night shows, which is a format that I love. But, oh gosh, like really, they need to cancel a few. They really need to rethink what they're doing. And I look at Conan O'Brien, who's left to now just do like funny travelogues around a place, which I think the first one of those is going to debut in the next couple of months. He's gotten out at the exact right time. And considering that he came back to do his Conan program, and my complaint back then was that it was a really tired retread of what he'd been doing previously, and he should have reinvented the formats come back. At least he's doing it now. And in fairness to him, during the time that he did that Conan TV program, they reinvented that format. They started filming in like a comedy theater. Like that show was looking quite different to anything else by the time that it went off the air. More shows need to do that. Anyway, guys, somehow I've cranked out a 30-odd minute podcast here, which I expected to be 7 minutes. I'm getting out of here. Folks, this has been Screen Watching. I'll be back next week with a guest host. I think I'm going to talk a bit more about US Late Night with that host, with my co-host, because they're going to have some stuff to say about this. Anyway, going to have a chat with them next week. Also, there's a new TV program which I'm under embargo to talk about, but I quite liked. Did I talk about this earlier in this podcast? I don't remember what I've been doing for the last 30 minutes. But I can tell you, I've seen some episodes. I can't tell you I've seen episodes of a show that I can't name. But anyway, I'm going to talk about that next week. It's a big show. I'm looking forward to it. This has been Screen Watching. If you've liked this, check out my newsletter. It's called Always Be Watching. It's at alwaysbewatching.com. Comes out 5 days a week. It's good, man. You got to dig it. Anyway, folks, this has been Screen Watching. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.